nice to see some new faces coming in. Welcome to all of those of you who are joining us today. I hear there are more and more coming. Is anybody starting to get tired yet? No. Oh, just started. Okay, this evening we're going to look at the Last Supper. So, we have had a prayer, and so I'm going to ask the four who prepared to present to come and do that now. I heard them practicing a little bit, and it sounds great. So, the four of you are going to read the verses, not these verses, but these passages. Actually, we'll put it up. These are the verses you're reading, right?
Almost.
Almost?
Yeah, that's. She was the one before. It's the right one.
It's correct.
Yes.
Great. So, yeah, we'll give you the time, and we'll start with the scripture reading. Maybe should we have a word of prayer before we come up? Father in heaven, we thank you for being with us and teaching us and for leaving your word. Where would we be without the Bible? I pray that you'll bless the four who are coming as they recite your words, and we pray that you will bless all of us as we hear them and as we study more deeply into what Jesus did and shared that last evening he was together with his disciples. May he come and be with us this evening and share with us also. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Viņš nāca ar tiem
un apsēdās ar tiem 12 mācekļiem.
Un tie pie galda sēžot un ēdot, Jēzus sacīja:
Es nerunāju par jums visiem, es zinu, kuru esmu izredzējis, bet jāpiepildās rakstiem, kas man maizēd, pret mani pacēla savu kāju. Jau tagad es jums to saku, pirms tas ir noticis, lai jūs, kad tas notiek, ticētu, ka es tas esmu. Patiesi es jums saku, kas uzņem, ko es sūtu, tas uzņem mani, bet kas mani uzņem to, kas man sūtīs.
Bet redzi, man nodevēja roku ar mani pie galda.
Un to sacīs garās atrieks, liecināja un sacīja: Patiesi, es jums saku, viens no jums,
kas ar mani ēd,
mani nodos. Mācekļi paskatījās citu neziņā, par kuru viņš runā.
Un tie ļoti noskuma. Un cits pēc cita viņam sacīja: taču ne es, kungs. Bet viņš atbildēja un sacīja:
viens no tiem 12,
kas ar mani mēdz savu roku ļodā.
Jo cilvēka dēls gan kā aiziet, kā tas nolic. Tomēr vai tam cilvēkam, kas viņu nodod.
Šim cilvēkam būtu labāk, ka tas nemaz nebūtu dzimis.
Un tie sāk apjautāties savā starpā, kurš gan no viņiem tas esot, kas to darīšu.
Viens no viņa mācekļiem sēdēja pie Jēzus krūtīm. To Jēzus mīlēja. Tam Simons Pēters pamāja un saka viņam: vaicā, kurš tas ir, par ko viņš runā? Es noliecies pie Jēzus krūtis, saka: kungs, kurš tas ir? Jēzus atbild: tas ir tas, kam es kumos iemērcis to došu. Un kumos iemērcis viņš to ņēma un dod Jūdam, Sīmaņa dēlam Iskariotam. Un pēc šī kumos tanī iegāja Sātans.
Bet Jūda, kas viņu nodeva, atbildēja un sacīja: taču ne es rabi. Viņš saka uz to: tu to teici.
Ko tu dari, to tu dari drīz. Bet no tiem, kas pie galda sēdēja, neviens nekā nesaprata, kādā nolūkā viņš tam to sacīja. Jo dažiem šķita, ka Jēzus tāpēc, ka Jūdam bija maks, tam būtu sacījis: iepērts uz svētkiem, kā mums vajag, vai dod kaut ko nabagiem, un saņēmis kumus, jūtas teikšs izgāja ārā un bija nakts.
Amen.
Wow.
Isn't that great? Have you ever seen anything like that before?
No.
That was fantastic. I don't know what you said, but I know you said it well. Very, very well done. You guys did a great job. So they've set the bar pretty high, so the next groups will have something to aim for. Maybe even surpass, we'll see. How many of you did some of the homework? Some of, yeah. How many of you, anybody do all of the homework? Nah, it was a lot. Actually, I don't expect anybody to do all of the homework. Now I've set it up over here. We've hung up, actually I didn't, Inga did. It's hung up over there, so this will be the homework for every passage. So you get the passages here when I'm done now, and then this is the homework for that. So those of you who've joined us today, if you have any questions, just ask me or one of the others, and we can explain to you what we're doing. So this evening we are, because we're going chronologically, we started with the longest and the hardest passage first, basically. All the sections we're going to talk about, the Last Supper, Gethsemane, the arrest, the trials, the crucifixion and the resurrection, this is by far the longest, especially if we would take everything Jesus said at that Last Supper according to what John records, because from John 13 to John 17 is just Jesus. I mean, it's part of what happened at the Last Supper. Most of it is Jesus talking and Jesus praying. So, really, after that presentation, we could just say amen and go home. It was so great. Any of you would like to share something that you've learned from the homework you've done, from what you've done so far on this? I understand you didn't do everything. By the way, we've tried both ways now. We've tried translation up front and translation simultaneous. Which do you prefer? Is this okay? Would I continue to talk, or would you prefer to have mine or somebody else translating from the front? I'm willing to do either way.
If this is the longest topic, then stay there alone.
I'll try not to make the longest talk. We're just gonna have to take the highlights. Just hit some of the highlights. If it's fine with me, I would be willing to have translation up here.
It's good enough. I
This
even
is
didn't
good.
mention you don't speak Latvian, so it's good, I guess.
Since I don't speak Latvian. Well, if I did, then we'd have to have translation into English, because there's several people who don't speak Latvian. My guess is I will never learn Latvian as well as I would like to. Okay, so we're just going to have to hit the high points. We're just going to have to take a few of the gems, a few of the nuggets here. But any of you, do you have something you'd like to share? Something you learned, something you noticed, something you've never seen before? Maybe you have a little timeline that you worked out, or some points, something you learned about God's character, the plan of salvation, anything? Anybody just have anything they'd like to share?
I just really love doing it. I really like the putting it all together and finding and yes.
Is that nice? Was it a challenge to figure out what happened when?
Yes.
When did John ask Jesus, right? When did John talk to Jesus and say, who is it?
Yes.
Because only John tells that story. So when does he do this? When does Jesus give Judas? Why does Judas ask in one place and in the other he doesn't? It's very interesting. We'll look a little bit about that. Yeah? So you just enjoy the process?
Yes.
Anybody else?
Nothing that you didn't say yesterday.
Huh?
Nothing that you didn't say yesterday about how different they are. For example, I understood that Matthew, it was really basic. It was just the core points. And for Mark, there was a little bit more detail. And for Luke, it was more detailed talk about betrayal. And for John, it was a lot of dialogue
isn't it? When you combine them all, a lot happened there.
Yeah.
A lot happened there. I think God wanted everyone to write it differently so we can put it together, because this process is very interesting. Had we just had one story, it would be very interesting, but the process of putting it together really helps us. And it gives the Spirit opportunity to help inspire us and help us what happened when. Anything else? We have a pretty full schedule here, so I don't know how much time we're going to have for doing all these things, but the more you put into the homework, the more you'll get out of these meetings, because I'm just going to be able to pick the tops. Roger, do you remember, and Rita, the two of you were in Lillehammer. Do you remember, did anybody do like 2 or 3 people talking at the same time there? I'm not sure. This was really well done tonight. Maybe some did, but this was really well done. Thank you guys. That required a lot of practice. It was well done. So the next one, so you're going to volunteer later this evening. You might save some energy or some work if you would get some tips from those 4 who presented this evening. They did a great job. Okay, let's start in John 13. We're going to be jumping back and forth a lot, as you understand. Start in John 13, verse 1, because this is just like a summary of the whole plan of salvation. You know, throughout this story, there are so many windows into a wider view. There are so many windows into the plan of salvation, into God's character, into the way God is wherever He's at. And John 13:1 is one of those windows. It says, now before the feast of the Passover, this is the main thing. Jesus, knowing... Are you still turning? I need to take time for you. Everybody there? Some pastors in America, they say, if you're there, say amen.
Amen.
If you're not, say have mercy. John 13:1. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that His hour had come. How much did Jesus know about what was going to happen to Him? Somebody?
Everything.
He knew everything that was going to happen. He knew what was going to take place. In fact, He had told, we're going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be betrayed, I'm going to be mistreated, I'm going to die. He knew that His hour had come. Now this word hour, we're going to be looking at this, because this word hour comes up several times in the story. Jesus, knowing that His hour had come, that He would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved His own who were in the world, He loved them to the end. So here you have, Jesus knows what's coming, but His love doesn't change. Jesus sees the future, but His love for His people is still the same. That's just a glimpse of the plan of salvation. Jesus knows what's coming, and yet He doesn't stop loving. Now, let's go to Matthew. Matthew 26, verse 20. Matthew 26, we're going to be doing lots of going back and forth between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John here. You know, you could spend a year just putting together a study and understanding what happened at the Last Supper. You could study this every day, and you would basically still just cover the surface. There's so much that happened here. So, but Matthew 26:20. Now when evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12 disciples. What does the Latvian Bible say for reclining? Or my Bible said reclining. What does the Latvian Bible say?
Sit down.
Outside. Sit down.
Sitting? How about the Lithuanian Bible?
Came by the table.
So what does that mean?
Coming by the table.
Oh, he came by the table. Oh, sorry. You were speaking. It said
Sorry.
came by the table. Kneeling? Near the table? Okay. This, you know, the tables then were probably not like the tables we have now. You know, a long table, and you have the picture that Leonardo da Vinci painted, the famous Last Supper painting, where I was sitting at a table. It was probably more of a low table, something kind of like this, or something round, and you would sit at it like this. The food would be here, and you're sitting around. And so this is how John could lay on Jesus' bosom. You're kind of sitting around. It's something like this, probably made out of clay, probably just kind of a higher place in the middle of the floor, and that was the table. And so he's sitting, reclining at the table. Now, while he's reclining at the table, how much does he know about what's going to happen in the next 24 hours?
Everything.
What is going to happen in the next 24 hours? What's going to happen to him? He's going to be betrayed, arrested. Before that, he's going to sweat blood in the garden. He's going to go through agony like no human has ever gone through, wrestling with whether to save this hopeless race or not. He's going to be betrayed. He's going to be arrested. What more?
To the court.
He's going to go to the trials.
Saturday.
What kind of pain?
All kinds of pain.
He's going to be slapped in the face. He's going to be spit on. He's going to be mocked. They're going to put a crown of thorns on his head. They're going to hit him with a reed. They're going to, my stomach is almost churning just thinking about it. They're going to scourge him at least 2 times with a whip, tearing chunks of flesh out of his back. They're going to put this cross on him that he starts to carry, but it's so heavy that it crushes him to the ground. He's going to fall, and the cross is going to smash his head into the ground. They're going to put this cross on another man, and they're going to take him up to this mountain. They're going to nail him to this cross and slam it into the hole as he's hanging by nails. They're going to mock him. He's going to be thirsty. He's going to be hungry. He's not going to sleep until he dies. He's going to be betrayed by one of his 12, and that one man, that disciple is going to die. He's going to hang on that cross, forsaken by God. There's going to be darkness for 3 hours, and he's going to scream out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he's going to lift up with one mighty effort, and he's going to shout out, it is finished! And an earthquake is going to come, and he's going to say, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, and he's going to die. That is going to happen in less than 24 hours. And Jesus is reclining at the table with his disciples, and he knows what's going on. If you knew that kind of thing was going to happen, if you knew that within 24 hours you're going to die a bloody, gruesome death, and one of the others here in this room is going to die by hanging himself by suicide, if you knew that, and you knew all of the other suffering, would you recline at a table and enjoy supper with your friends? Think about what Jesus is doing. Who is he thinking about at this moment?
About mission.
He's thinking about mission. What else is he thinking about? What's going through his mind? He knows what's going on. That's what we read of John. He knows what's going to happen. He's thinking about the purpose. He's thinking about his disciples. If you read the whole story of the Last Supper, he's just thinking about giving them instruction. Read John 13 to 17. He's just talking about, or at least John 13 to 16, he's just talking about them. In John 17, he's praying for them. Even though Jesus knows the agony he is going to go through in the next 24 hours, starting in just a couple hours, he's reclining at a table, eating supper with his disciples. That blows me away. That he had such self-control, he had such love for them. What would you be doing? What would your posture be if you knew all this was going to happen in the next 24 hours? It was about this time in the evening. They're gathered there, and you know that by 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, you're going to be dead. One of your closest associates is going to be dead. You're going to be bleeding. You're going to be mocked. You're going to be forsaken by everybody. Would your stomach allow you to recline at a table and eat supper? I'd be pacing. I'd be pulling out the hair that I don't have. I'd be so freaking out. I'd be walking back and forth. I would be in a total panic. And Jesus is reclining at the table. His 12 disciples. Isn't that amazing? He's just thinking about his disciples. He's loving them to the end. Has anybody made a timeline? Has anybody put a timeline together? Have you tried what happened when? I actually haven't. I didn't present this one in Norway at Easter. And so I haven't put as much time into it as the others. And so I don't really have a timeline. I don't know what happened. When did Jesus wash their feet? What happened first? From what you've read, from what they presented, this evening was just one section. What do you think happened first? When did Jesus wash their feet?
Before supper.
Before supper? It kind of seems like that, but let's look at what John says. And this is, it's difficult for me. I don't have an answer
Because
to
nobody
this.
wants to do it, and they do it before usually.
Yeah, normally.
Some
Look at-
servant come and wash all.
Let's look at John. Let's go back to John 13. Now, I have a Bible. In the back, it has a harmony of the Gospels. It means it's trying to do what we're trying to do. It's basically saying this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened from all the different accounts. And according to that harmony of the Gospels, it says that John is 100% chronological. John is the one that's exactly chronological, and the other one's more or less. You know, they're kind of like me, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They might jump around and jump forward and jump backwards when they're telling their story. They don't always necessarily go in chronological order. That's the way I am, and they seem to have a purpose for it. Usually I do it just because my brain is kind of scattered. So, but it seems to be that the other ones are kind of jumping around. So whenever I'm wondering what happened when, I go back to John. So let's just look at John 13:2. During supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper, and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So did it happen before or after supper?
During.
Ah, it must be during. It says during supper, right? He got up from supper because their supper isn't over, because down in verse 26, he gives a piece of bread that he's dipped into the sauce or the wine, he gives it to Judas. So it seems to be that this happens in the middle. They've already started eating. So, okay, that makes sense. It seems to be during supper. So he pours water and he goes around. What is he doing? Washing and drying their feet. What does that mean? Why is he doing that? Did he have to take off their socks, take off their shoes and socks? Why not? Because what did they have? Probably some sandals. Yeah, we read about sandals. They had some sandals. So they're walking around in dusty roads with probably muddy and dirty feet, walking around the city, and there's animals there. They probably have really kind of gross feet. It's not, I've lived in Africa, and you don't walk around barefoot in Africa. There's glass, there's garbage, and there's poop everywhere. So it's probably kind of like that. I mean, you had animals, you had horses, you had sheep, you had cows, you had all the sacrifices. This was Passover time, so there was over 1 million people in Jerusalem, and lots and lots of animals. So their feet were nasty. Their feet were gross. And Jesus gets down, and he starts going around and washing their feet. You know whose feet he washed first? This is just a side note of the Desire Ages. Do you know whose feet he washed first?
Peter?
Judas. He started with Judas. Judas was sitting closest to Jesus on the right side. Ellen White apparently saw that. So he washes Judas's feet, he washes everybody's feet. Peter has this reaction. He's like, no, you're not washing my feet. Why does Peter say that? Why does Peter say you're not washing my feet?
Because he didn't understand.
He didn't understand. What did he understand? Peter understood enough to say, no, don't do this. What did he understand?
He didn't understand what the purpose of Jesus, what he wanted to learn them.
He didn't understand what Jesus was wanting to teach them. Yeah, that's true. But he must have understood enough. What was he understanding to say, no, don't do this?
Because
He understood.
Jesus is superior to them, he was just He didn't want the teacher to be the teacher to walk their feet. I mean, like he's following, he's lower than them.
He's becoming what? He is acting like their servants. He's their master. And he says this. He says, you call me Lord and Master, and you are right, because I am. And if I have washed your feet, you should wash one another's. Peter understood Jesus is humiliating himself, and he doesn't. He said, no, my master cannot be a servant. This doesn't work. I can't allow this. But Jesus goes through with it, and he washes everybody's feet. First, Peter says, don't do it. And then he says, if I don't wash you, you don't have any part with me. And then Peter says, okay, wash everything. He says, no, you've already been baptized. This is just washing the feet. You're clean already otherwise. He says, not all of you, and he's referring to Judas. And then he gets back up and he says, you call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, because I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, don't think that you are too big and too important to wash one another's feet. Jesus is giving us an example of service. Jesus is telling us that his kingdom is upside down. His kingdom is the opposite of anything else. And he continues, he starts talking about the betrayal. He talks about this so many times. But before we get into the betrayal, no, let's go to the betrayal. I don't have this as clear in my mind as I would like it to be. So, he has at least 3 times, it seems like, he's referring to Judas at the Last Supper. Let's go to John 13, verse 21. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit, and he testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you that one of you will betray me. We're in John 13, 21. Is everybody there? John chapter 13, verse 21. So Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. So here they are, they're all around this table, and Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. And then the disciples began looking at one another at a loss to know of which one he was speaking. There was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Later we find out that this is John. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, tell us who it is of whom he is speaking. So Peter's like, get him to tell you who it is. So he leans back on Jesus' bosom, on his chest, and he says, Lord, who is it? And Jesus talking closely to him, he says, it's the one who I will dip the morsel and give to him. So he had dipped a piece of bread, and he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now, apparently, Judas hadn't been following along. Judas hasn't been aware of all of what was going on. So, now we're going to have to go back to the other ones and to get a picture of that. Is it possible, you think, man, how would Judas not know? Is it possible to be sitting at a table and something happen at that table that you're not aware of? I mean, this table up here, you have 3-4 conversations going on at the same time, right? In fact, something so important could be happening on one end of the table that people's lives are they're so absorbed in it, or some event or some words are said that would actually affect people for the rest of their lives. And people on the other end are totally oblivious, and they're just eating their heavenly manna or whatever, and they're not aware of what's going on just a couple meters away from them. So that can happen. That's a dynamic. Is it possible to be so absorbed in thought that you miss what's going on around you? Any of you ever do that? Yeah, I do it on a regular basis. I'm so absorbed in thought. What? Oh. I said, come on, it's time to go, or whatever. So it seems like that must have been what was going on, because let's go back to Matthew. Matthew tells the story a little differently. He doesn't have this part about John asking, who is it? And Matthew 26, verse 25. The same thing. He's talking about the one who dipped his hand with me in the bowl is the one who will betray me. Maybe Judas, maybe I kind of imagine everyone else is, this is Matthew 26, verse 24, or 23. I imagine that everyone else is like when Jesus reaches his morsel of food, when he reaches to dip it in the bowl, everyone else is like, oh, I'll just wait. Everyone else is polite, and Judas is like, he dips it, he doesn't even care, he just dips it together with Jesus. So both their hands are in there at the same time. Everyone else is like, oh, he's a master. But Judas is starting to think he's the clever one. Judas is thinking he's better than Jesus. So I get this picture of the guy who's so arrogant that he dips it with me at the same time. All the rest of you, you're holding back. You wait till I'm done, and while I'm eating, you're dipping. But this guy, he just dips it in at the same time. Matthew 26. I don't know if it comes through in the Latvian. It says, he who dipped his hand with me in the bowl is the one who will betray me. It's talking about happening at the same time. Does it say that in Latvian? Same thing. Then verse 25. And Judas, who was betraying him, said, "Surely it is not I, Rabbi." Jesus said to him, "You have said it yourself." So Judas, everyone else, back in verse 22, each of them began to say, it's not I, is it? And so maybe this is happening first. You have them saying, it's not I, is it me, is it me, is it me? And then Judas isn't part of this. And so everyone else has said, is it I? And Jesus hasn't answered. And everyone's looking at Judas because he dipped his bread with Jesus in the morsel in the bowl. And suddenly Judas realizes, everybody's looking at me. Oh, is it I, Rabbi? And that's the picture I get when Judas is like, he's distracted, he's thinking about something else. Okay, I'm going to do this. You know, he's struggling, he's got a struggle. So after everyone else has asked, it's not I, is it? So he's like, it's not I, is it? And Jesus says, you have said it yourself. Now let's go back to John. This is amazing. This is how dense human beings can be. So look at this.
Lucas?
Back to John 13. Sorry, I'm jumping around a lot. Just if you're lost, just say, wait, where are we? I'll try to remember myself. John 13. So Jesus has dipped the morsel and given it to Judas. And then verse 27. After the morsel, Satan then entered into him. So in verse 2, it says the devil had already put in the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray him, but now Satan himself enters into Judas. Judas becomes demon-possessed by Satan himself. After the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. What is Jesus doing here?
Which verse is it?
I'm sorry.
27.
27. 13 and 27. After the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. What is Jesus doing here?
Rushing him little.
No, rushing him, maybe. Things need to happen.
Yeah, he knows, but
He's telling him he knows. He's definitely telling him that he knows, yeah. Who's giving orders? Jesus is directing, isn't he? He's the director of the play. He said, okay, what you do, you're on. Do it quickly. Judas did not leave the room until Jesus told him to. Who's in charge of this situation? Who's making sure Jesus will die the next day at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Judas is not the main actor. We know what Judas was wanting to do. We know that Judas wanted to get rich from betraying his master. Judas is absolutely not going to be in heaven. But Jesus didn't let Judas do what he was planning to do until the time was right. He says, what you do, do quickly. Now notice this, verse 28. Now, no one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. For some were supposing because Judas had the money box that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things we have need of for the feast, or else that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night. How dense, how dumb can human beings be? Jesus has mentioned his betrayal many times through his ministry. If you read the book of John, Jesus mentions betrayal many times. And in the others as well. And here at the Last Supper, he's mentioned it at least 3 times. He's made reference to it. One of you is going to betray me. One of you is going to betray me. And he tells John, it's the one that I give the bread to. And it says, no one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to. We can be so dumb. We can be so absorbed in our own world. We can be so convinced that what we believe is correct and right that Jesus can't say enough to get it into our heads what's actually happening. When he tells Judas, what you're going to do it quickly, they think, oh, he's going to go buy something for the feast, or he's going to go give some money to the poor or something. And he's just saying, you're the one. I find that amazing. Let's go to Luke. I don't know if I'm presenting this chronologically or not, but it's a little difficult. Luke 22. Luke 22, and we'll start in verse 21. Same story, but Luke tells different information. But behold, Luke 22:21. But behold, the hand of the one betraying me is with mine on the table. So in other words, he's here. Maybe they have their hands right there, right then, going for the bowl, like we see in Matthew. For indeed, the Son of Man is going as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. This is going to happen, but that man is going to be lost. And they begin to discuss among themselves which one of them it might be who was going to do this thing. So not only did they ask Jesus, is it me? Is it me? But they turned to each other like, who would do that? And they started to have this discussion among themselves. Who would do that? And they're like, who could possibly do that to Jesus? And so they're having this discussion, who is going to do this? And apparently they don't think of Judas, because when Jesus actually points him out, as we see in Matthew and John, and tells him what you do quickly, they don't get it. They don't know what's going on. So, like, Judas must have been such a fantastic person, seemed to be. He must have been such a handsome, clever, wealthy, perhaps, guy, that everyone is like, yeah, Judas, I mean, he's the number one guy. When there's a discussion among the disciples, for sure Judas is like, okay, I'm the one next to Jesus, so who's going to be after me? And everyone else is like, okay, who's going to be after Judas? They must have thought Judas is like, he's the stuff. He's great. So they begin to discuss with one another who it might be who's going to do this thing. They don't single out Judas. And then what is the next thing that happens? What is the next thing that takes place? And there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be greatest. So they go from saying, who would do this? Who's going to betray Jesus? Who would possibly do that? Are you going to do it? I could not quite. Maybe you. I would never do that. And they go from this discussion to not me to, I could never do that. I'm going to be the greatest in the kingdom. You think I would possibly betray Jesus? I'm going to be, you're not going to be number one. No, I'm going to be. And they get this fight going. And you know, what is the word for dispute in Latvia? Verse 25, and there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be greatest. What's the word for argument or dispute or discussion?
Heel.
So what does that mean?
Conflict.
A conflict. Okay. So a conflict between them. I looked it up in the Greek, and I don't know the Greek at all, but it's a word that has philo in it. What is philo? Phil in Greek. You must know this. Phileo. It's love.
Love.
Or like.
Friends,
Something
yeah.
you like very much. Not like deep, deep, deep love, but something you like a lot. Like brotherly love. So it's philo-Nikeia or something. And so the definition in the Strong's Concordance is love of strife. This must have been like their favorite little topic. Like they were so often engaged in this discussion, who's going to be greatest, that it became their pet topic. This is the topic they love to discuss. So while in the process of discussing and saying, who's going to do it? Who's going to betray him? They just naturally just slide into their pet topic of, yeah, but I couldn't do it because I'm going to be the greatest in the kingdom. You're not going to be the greatest. I told you I'm going to be the greatest. And you get this little picking. How dumb can humans be? And he said to them, I mean, Jesus, look at this patience. You know, there would have been a point when I was just like, you guys forget it. Like, you don't deserve this. You don't. I'm going home. Like, you guys forget it. No, Jesus doesn't say that. He's still instructing them. He said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But it is not this way with you. You're in a different kingdom now, guys. You're in a different world now, guys. It is not this way with you. But the one who is the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like the servant. The kingdom of God is upside down compared to this world. Actually, the kingdom of God is right side up, and our world is upside down. For who is greater? The one who reclines at the table, or the one who serves? What's the obvious answer? Who's greater in this situation? You have a servant and one being served. Who's the greater one? The one being served is the greater one. That's the obvious answer in this world. But, Jesus says, he says, is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as the one who serves. Look at your feet. Look how clean your feet are. I just washed all the poop and the dirt and the mud off of your feet. Yeah, have you ever been in a place where there's lots of animals walking around? and there's mud and it's not from rain. No, it was nasty. And he says, look at your feet. I am among you like the one who serves. You have proof on your own bodies that my kingdom is not like the kingdom of this world. He's just patiently talking with them. You are those who have stood by me in my trials. And just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you that you may. Now think about this. Jesus is over and over again trying to teach them what his kingdom is like. That you may, verse 30, Luke 22:30, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. What kind of thrones, what kind of judgment, what kind of leadership will the apostles have in heaven? It's a leadership based on service, isn't it? If they got it, they would have said, oh, we're going to be sitting on thrones, but that means we're going to be serving everybody. When we get to heaven, the apostles are going to be running around feeding us. When we get to heaven, the apostles are going to be, whatever service has to happen in heaven, the apostles are the ones who are going to be doing it. They probably didn't get it then, but by the end of their lives, I'm sure they did. Now, before we go to the end of Luke, because that's important when we get to the end of Luke, let's go back to Matthew 26. Jesus, there's so much in this passage. There's no way we can touch it all. So Jesus gives them the bread. He said, this is my body. He gives them the wine, the grape juice. He says, this is my blood. I'm not going to drink of this until that day when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. He's been waiting for 2,000 years to have a glass of grape juice. And I can imagine that the grape juice in heaven is really, really, really good. And yet he's not drinking it. After singing the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. We're in Matthew 26, verse 31. Then Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. But Peter said to him, even though all may fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, this very night before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same thing too. Those of you who presented this evening, did you notice what Mark adds there that no one else had? I didn't understand a lot of things, so I didn't understand if you got it. Who was Mark? You were Mark, right? Did you write in this description of what Peter would do that night before the rooster crows? Did you notice Mark adds in something that none of the others had? Everybody has the part about the betrayal, right? Everybody, didn't you guys talk about this, or was it about Judas? Was it this section you talked about? No, it wasn't about Peter's denials. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. You read about Judas' betrayals. Mark says, we don't have to go there, but Mark says, this night before the rooster crows, twice you'll deny me 3 times. He's the only one who says it. Everyone else says just once. Very interesting. Maybe we'll look a little more at that in the trials. I want to go back to verse 31. Then Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered. Let's go to the Old Testament, the second to the last book, Zechariah, right before Malachi. It's just 2 books before Matthew. Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, right at the end of the Old Testament. Zechariah chapter 13, and verse 7. We'll start at verse 6 to see who this is talking about. Zechariah 13, 6. Are you all there? Amen. And one will say to him, what are these wounds between your arms? Or what are these wounds in your hands? What does the Latvian say? Verse 6. Zechariah 13, 6. Between your arms or in your hands? Hands? Say that. In your chest? Okay. And your finger? What is it? Can someone just translate it?
If they ask you about the signs on your chest.
On your chest. So, Jesus had wounds on his hands and his arms, and he will say, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. So this is talking about Jesus. This is talking about when we get to heaven, there's going to be people who don't know why Jesus has scars. And they say, what are these wounds? And he's going to explain the story of how he got these wounds in the house of his friends. Then verse 7. This, now, I don't really understand this verse, but I'm sharing it with you anyway. But I actually don't understand any verse completely, so I have that as a criteria. So, but this verse is the best description we have in the Bible of what is going on with Jesus during these last hours of his life. This is the best description we have of the new relation that has come in between the Son and the Father. There's a whole change. Throughout all eternity, they have been as one. Throughout all eternity, and it's hard to talk about the Father and the Son without using plural words, even though the Bible doesn't do that. You know, the Bible, I've not found a place where the Bible, oh, there's one, but it's a little obscure. The Bible doesn't, humans never say they, referring to God. You notice that? God can say, from Genesis 1, Genesis 3, Genesis 11, Isaiah 6, there's many places in the Bible where God says, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. So God can refer to himself in the plural, but humans never do that in the Bible. Humans are very consistent. Humans do not say, in the Bible, humans do not say, they, referring to God. Jesus says, we, talking to the Father, he said, we are one, we were one, but humans don't say they are one. So it's a little difficult to talk about this because it's a topic that is so beyond our comprehension, how God can be a unity of three persons. So it's difficult for me to talk about it without saying they, but just so you know, the Bible doesn't do that. Verse 7. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man, my associate. The picture we get here is of the Father calling for a sword. Now, what does a sword represent in the Bible? The Word? What else? If you do a study on this, and if you get a Bible with cross-references, and you can look at other verses that refer to this, a sword is the punishment. A sword is often used as a picture of God's punishment of the wicked. So what do you do with the sword? When you use the word the sword, what is that? And you're talking in this context, what happens? What is the sword for? For killing. That's exactly. It's a device for executing someone, for killing somebody. So when the Father says, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, he's giving a command to the sword to slay the shepherd. But he doesn't just call him the shepherd. He says, and against the man, my associate, my fellow, my companion. What does the Latvian say?
The one that's close to me.
The one that's close to me. What does the Latvian say?
Close to me.
Close to me? One who's close to me? It is hard for us to imagine how close the Father and the Son are. Throughout eternity, the Father and the Son have been one. And the Spirit. They have been one. They are, I say they, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one. There is no human experience. No two people can be as close as the Father and the Son are. It's not possible. Throughout eternity, the Father and the Son have been as one. They are friends. I keep saying they. It's actually very difficult for me to talk about this without saying they. God is one, and God is love. And this represents a unity, a closeness, a bond. The one who is close to me, it says. My associate, my fellow, my friend, my companion. Have you ever wanted to kill your closest friend?
No.
I hope most of us say no. I mean, we're corrupt and we're sinful, and sometimes you get angry at people. But when God comes to the point where he says to the sword, go against my friend, my fellow, that means he's planning to kill one who's closest to him. An entirely new element has come in. And the reason I bring this up is because the rest of this verse is what Jesus quoted. It says, declares the Lord of hosts, strike the shepherd that the sheep may be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little one. This is the verse that Jesus quotes at the Last Supper, saying, the shepherd will be smitten, the shepherd will be struck, and the sheep will be scattered. You all are going to leave me. He got that from Zechariah 13. He understood because he put it there that Zechariah 13 is saying all of his disciples are going to leave him because of him being smitten. I'm supposed to be done loud, huh?
Never mind.
No, we didn't start.
Oh, yeah.
We don't
Yeah, that's
start
what you
trying.
Let's go back. Let's go back to... Yeah, I'm going to bring this up again. The only reason I mentioned this from Zechariah now is I'm going to bring up the sword again because Jesus brings it up again. Actually, 2 times we're going to see it again. This new element, and I really don't understand it very well, but this is describing what is happening in the Godhead. This change of dynamic from being my closest one to being the one I'm going to slay. The love doesn't change, but a new command is given for the sword to slay the shepherd. If you saw somebody who caused their closest friend to be killed, what would you think about that person? Would you want to be close to that person? Would you want to become their new closest friend? But God does it in such a way that we love Him even more because they both went into this together. The Father and the Son agreed on what was going to happen. The Father and the Son had a plan throughout eternity, and they're now in the process of following. Jesus was not forced. He received the commandment from His Father, but He Himself was part of the plan. Okay, let's go to Luke. Oh, I think we'll finish up with this evening. There's so much. Okay, back to Luke. Luke 22, verse 35. And He said to them, when I sent you out without money belt, sorry, here's some still turning.
22, 45?
22, 35, sorry. Luke 22, 35. And He said to them, when I sent you out without money belt and bag and sandals, you did not lack anything, did you? They said, no, nothing. So when was that? When did Jesus send them out without money, bag, and belt and sandals? Very early in His ministry, right? He called the disciples, He trained them, He showed them what to do, and then He sent them out, right? And that happened in Luke 9. You can read about it in Luke 9, verse 3. You can read about it in Luke 10, verse 4, for those of you who are taking notes. We won't go there. But then in Luke 12, Jesus says something very interesting. In Luke 12, it's kind of like Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount. Many of the same ideas that are given in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are given here in Luke 12. Luke 12:33. Jesus tells His disciples, sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out. So is Jesus saying you need to get really, really good leather to make a money belt out of? They must have had some belt maybe around their neck or some hanging around their waist. Is He saying you need to get the best, highest quality leather? Is that what He's telling them? What is He telling them? Get the one in heaven. Because that's what He continues by saying. He says, make yourselves money belts which do not wear out. And they're thinking, no, we need to make some high quality nylon fabric that will resist wear. Jesus says, no. An unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If the disciples had been understanding and had been obeying what Jesus had told them to do, what He tells them to do now, they would have understood. When we go back to Luke 22. They would have got it. They would have been, okay, we know what He's saying because we've obeyed. If we obey Jesus and we follow His leading, we will understand way, way more than if we're just like theoretically trying to comprehend what He's telling us. So He says, did you lack anything? They said nothing. In verse 36, Luke 22:36. And He said to them, but now, whoever has a money belt is to take it along. Now, He's already told them go out without a money belt, but He's told them get a money belt from or in heaven. He's like, that treasure you have in heaven, all that you've been storing up, all that knowledge and that wealth of wisdom that you have been gaining by being with me for 3.5 years, take it with you now. You're going to need it. You're going to need it. Where we're going now, you must have everything you possibly can. Did they need money? And then the next day, did they need money? Would money have done them any good? No. He's saying that wealth, that everything that you've stored up in heaven, take it with you now. All your knowledge of the spiritual life, all your knowledge of what it means to be a Christian, take it now because you're going to need it. Likewise also obey. And whoever, now watch this, and whoever has no what? No? What does it say in the Bible? Is it close enough that you're able to follow me in the language? And whoever has no what? Sword. Is to sell his coat and buy one. At this moment, when Jesus is speaking these words, they may be, like they must just be getting ready to go out to Gethsemane. How many disciples were with them? Were there? At this moment when Jesus is saying these words, how many disciples were there? 11. So, if Jesus was speaking to them literally, how many swords should they have had? 11. Right? Because he says, if you don't have a sword, sell your coat and get one. Now, he must also be using sword in a spiritual sense, because look what he says. For I tell you that this which is written, it must be fulfilled in me, and he was numbered with transgressors, for that which referred to me has its fulfillment. Now, in this sense, the sword must not be the punishment against sin. The sword must be the other thing that you said the sword represents, which is, what's the main symbol of the sword in the Bible? The Word of God. So he must be saying, gather up everything you know about the Bible. Gather up everything you know about the Word, because you're going to need it. You're going to need all your Christian experience. You're going to need everything you've stored up, all the treasure you've stored up. You're going to need all your wisdom. And you're going to need to have the Word with you. I'm wearing out the translators. Because look what happens. They said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. Like, Jesus never told us to have swords, but we have 2. That means maybe they're thinking, okay, so which 9 of us should sell our coats to get the other 9 swords? And he said to them, what did he say to them? It is enough. Come on, guys. 3.5 years invested in you? That's plenty. Right? You don't need any more than that. Oh, they're like, yes, swords, battle, yeah. They pick up 2 swords. And he says, that's plenty. Let's go. Don't have time? I doubt that Jesus was as disappointed and as frustrated with his disciples as I would have been. Was I being, as I say this? But the time has come and he says, if you didn't get it already, you're not going to get it now. Let's go. It's too late. Let's go. And they go out. They sing a hymn, and they go out. And they go to Gethsemane. Did you see some powerful things there this evening? Did you see some powerful things in this story? I think it's only going to get better. The rest are shorter, and I've studied them more. So tomorrow, this is our section. This is Gethsemane, and someone can come up and write that in Latvia. So at some point. So these are the sections. These are the passages we're going to be covering tomorrow evening. At the same time tomorrow evening. And so the homework is the same using these passages now. Continue with your timeline. If you haven't started, pick it up here. You know, this is something. Keep track of this. This is something you can do back home also. So you don't have time to do it here. Matthew 26, 36 to 46. Mark 14, 32 to 42. Luke 22, 39 to 46. And Luke 18, only verse 1. Because only verse 1 goes together with these here. So that's the sections you're going to be reading tomorrow. Reading for tomorrow, preparing for tomorrow. Going through, make a timeline, pick one of the Gospels, and make a list of what is unique in that Gospel, make a list of what is left out from that Gospel, and then make a list of what is common, what everybody says. What does everybody tell? Actually, John tells only very little. He does tell some things that the others say, but you'll have quite a bit of agreement between these 3. And then, what do we learn about God's character? What do we learn about the plan of salvation from this story of Jesus in Gethsemane? And I need 4 volunteers. I need 4 volunteers to do what the group did this evening, to do that with this section. This is it. Yeah, I don't know if it's shorter actually, because we didn't have the whole thing. But you'll stand up here and do something like they did this evening. Who would like to do that tomorrow? You two? Eva and Esther? Who else? You're not Latvian now.
That's fine, it can be also in English.
Can you read the English part?
No, they can speak English.
Esther is not great with that. It's up to you guys. I'll leave it up to you guys. Maybe we can do an English evening one night, take the outfit, and look. How many of you would prefer to do it in English one evening? How many of you would do it if it was in English? Yeah, so we can do a whole English evening, one evening. But since we have these three ladies, you're wanting to do Latvian? Okay. So would you do it in Latvian? In English, yeah. Should we save you so maybe tomorrow evening or something we'll do it tomorrow in English? Just be quick to put your hand up tomorrow. Okay, so we need one more to be with Beata, Tieva, and Esther? Yes, in Latvian. So Oscar, the four of you can prepare this and to present it up front, and the rest of us will read through. I almost get knots in my stomach. Is there a question? Are there any questions about what the homework is? Some of you, you weren't here yesterday. Do you understand what you're supposed to do?
So we're just going to read it and answer to those questions. And so like for about a day when you have free time, right?
Yeah. Or this evening.
Okay. And you want to write something?
Yeah. This is for, I'm not going to ask you to turn it in or anything, but this is for your own study, for you to get as much as possible out of it tomorrow. So it's a good idea to write it down. Oscar's had it on his phone, I saw, so I write it down somewhere on my computer. Any other questions? Thank you for asking. So these are the passages that talk about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane up to the arrest. That's what we'll cover tomorrow. I get knots in my stomach just thinking about what Jesus was going to go through. I know we're going to discuss that. And yet, with all of that, Jesus was reclining at the table, and he tells Judas, what you do. It's your turn. You go. Jesus doesn't save us because he has to. Jesus doesn't save us because we deserve it. Jesus doesn't save us because we thought out a good way for him to do it and we told him what to do. Jesus saves us because he wants to and because he made the plan and he executed the plan. When I read the story of the last hours and days of Jesus' life, every desire in me to earn something by my prayers or by my outreach or by my best good works, that every desire just disappears and gets laid in the dust. Jesus does not have to save us, but he wants to save us. May he continue to reveal that to us. Let's pray. Father, you have not left us with a picture or a movie of what Jesus looked like or what he did. You've not left us with a painting on some wall, but you've left us with a story. And although we say a picture is worth 1,000 words, these words are worth 1,000 pictures and much more. We thank you for the revelation of Jesus that you give us through your word. Thank you for Jesus being focused on his disciples and on making sure that they had the Last Supper together with him, thinking of their needs, teaching them about the kingdom, trying to get them to understand the spiritual nature of what he had come to do. And thank you that we have the story, and we can read it, and we can understand it, and we can be changed by it.